So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. In my talk, I want to take a closer look at a line of research that has had a huge impact on the public perception of social media, the research that created the widespread idea that armies of so-called social bots are roaming Twitter and interfering with all kinds of political discussions. According to hundreds of news reports, social bots have been involved in political discussions about elections all over the world, about climate change, about migration, about COVID-19, about Brexit, and many more. And if you take a closer look, you can see that most of these news reports are based on some kind of academic research papers or preprints at least. So first of all, let's try to figure out what's a social bot. And there is a pretty consistent definition in most of these papers. So social bots are supposed to be automated, and they are trying to steer online discussions, and they are interactive, pretending to be humans. So that's the social bots we're talking about. Now, if you take an even closer look at this kind of research, you'll notice that almost all these papers are based on a tool called Botometer by Indiana University, where you feed in a Twitter account and you get back a score, which is called a probability. It's basically a number between 0 and 1, or between 0 and 5, depending on the interface you choose. And then these researchers typically select a threshold, typically 0.5, and if the account is the score is larger than 0.5, then they call these accounts bots. So now there is a public interface. You can easily try a Botometer with different accounts where you can assume those are real people. So I can assume Tim Cook is a real person, or the Pope, or the German Bundeskanzler, or Garry Kasparov, or Joe Biden. And also Auschwitz Museum is probably operated by a human being, or Jair Bolsonaro, or some people who have been heavily involved in the COVID discussions in Germany. And they all return scores that make them a bot, given the typical bot threshold. We've been working on this problem for quite a while. For example, in April 2018, we created a list of the members of US Congress who were present on Twitter, and you get this nice little bell curve which gives the bot scores of the members of US Congress. And you can see that basically half the members of US Congress are rated as bots by Botometer. Now, if you take a closer look at the methodology underlying all this research, it's always the same. You can use different types of magical bot classifiers. It's not only Botometer. You can also use a very simple approach, the Oxford idea. So if an account tweets more than 50 times per day, it's a bot. If it tweets less than 50 times per day, it's a human. But there's even more classifiers that use this very similar approach to Botometer. And you somehow create a list of accounts that have been tweeting about a certain political issue simply by doing a keyword search. You end up with a list of accounts, and you feed that into your bot classifier, and you end up with two lists. One of them you call bots, and the other you call humans. And then you pass that on to some journalist, and they will write a headline like, "Researchers, nearly half of accounts tweeting about political issue are bots." Now, of course, somebody who, like me, who comes from natural language processing and pattern recognition, somebody might be interested in seeing those actual bots and getting an impression, what can these artificial intelligent bots actually do? But you'll never get to see these bots. So they are always hidden. And this is kind of remarkable. So the authors of social bot studies never publish and nearly always withhold the list of alleged bots upon request. And no manual checks are performed whether the accounts identified using these methods are bots or not. They're simply referred to as bots. And I've been asking bot researchers for years now, and social bot researchers seem consistently unable to provide even a single credible example of a social bot. So in the remainder of this talk, we will show that the methodology employed is equally effective at demonstrating that unicorns are a widespread species in Africa. And we will show that the approach is built on circular reasoning because it violates a basic statistical law, the Bayes theorem. And we will show that the alleged bots found using this method are almost exclusively humans. So let's build a Botometer-style unicorn detector. So first of all, we need a training sample for our supervised classifier. So we choose some non-unicorns, let's say a cow, a pig, a cat, and a dog, and we need some unicorns. Of course, we don't have access to real unicorns, like the same problem social bot researchers have. So we use a unicorn-like animal, so a white horse, for example, and we use some toy unicorns, and we train some kind of statistical classifier, a random forest classifier, for example. And the random forest classifier will not pick up some magical properties of unicorns. Instead, it will pick up features that allow it to discriminate between those two samples. In this case, whiteness and pointiness might be features that are picked up. And now we deploy our unicorn classifier in the Serengeti, for example, and we end up with 33% unicorns because two of the animals, the zebra looks kind of like a lot like the horse, and the egret is white and pointy, so they get a very high bot score, and we can claim that 33% of the animals in the Serengeti are unicorns. Of course, if somebody asks wants to see the actual unicorns, this gets less credible, so we prefer to hide our unicorns. So trust us, we know what we're doing. So if we take a closer look at what's actually going on inside such a classifier, basically it will try to find a class boundary between those two data sets during the training phase. It will be perfect on the training data set. There will be a 100% recognition rate of unicorns versus non-unicorns. And so we can claim our unicorn recognizer has a close to 100% recognition rate. Of course, if we deploy it in the wild, we get lots of unicorns that don't look a lot like unicorns. So sometimes bot researchers manipulate the bot threshold in hoping that somehow that might improve the validity of their approach. But you can see, of course, you can get any unicorn prevalence you want, depending on the threshold you choose. But even if you choose a very high threshold, you cannot be sure that you actually found unicorns, but because in this case, the stork and the dragonfly will still be classified as unicorns, even if you choose a very high threshold. So even if we assume that unicorns exist, it is outright ridiculous to believe that all the animals classified as unicorns will be actual unicorns, that the relative amount of unicorns resulting from this approach can serve as an approximation for the true prevalence of unicorns, because if there are lots of white birds, this will give you a high prevalence of unicorns. And also the differences in the amount of unicorns in different samples measured using this approach can be interpreted as actual differences in the true prevalence of unicorns. And now the theoretical problem underlying this whole approach is that any classifier you train on a certain data set to make an optimal decision between unicorns and non-unicorns, or bots and non-bots, it will incorporate the P of bot, the prior probability, and it will learn that on the basis of the training set. And for Botometer, for example, it's 50-50. So they use 50% bots and 50% non-bots. So the underlying assumption is that 50% of the accounts are bots. So if you now use this classifier and count the results and use the relative amount of bots as an estimate of P of bot, that's simply circular reasoning. We get out what we put in. So to estimate the number of bots using this approach, you have to know it beforehand. It's simply not possible. Same is actually true for any kind of stuff you're trying to find. So it's also for fake news or for hate speech. If you use this kind of classifier, you're bound for disaster. It cannot work. So we, apart from understanding that it can't work theoretically, we wanted to understand what's actually going on in this kind of study. So we wanted to take a closer look at actual bot studies. So this is a peer-reviewed study. The claim was that roughly 10% of the accounts following the German political parties are social bots. So we basically replicated this study. We fed all the followers of German political parties into Botometer and looked at the bot scores. And then we selected a representative sample because there were many, many thousands of bots. So we selected 109 representative samples from these so-called bots. And it's pretty disappointing. Those are really normal people, lots of accounts that didn't tweet a lot or only a single tweet. And if you look at the highest scoring accounts, for example, this is a dance cafe in Erfurt that tweeted 11 times during its active period. Nothing really interesting. Or a guy complaining about noise caused by motorcycles. And if you do some research, you can see actually on this day in the morning in this place, there was actually a motorcycle event. So that's actually true. Those are real people writing about real issues. You can take a close look at the list. There's a link in our paper, so you can check whether you believe any of these accounts is a bot. We did the same for another study, which is a peer-reviewed study about the role of bots in spreading vaccine critical information. In this case, we actually managed to obtain the list of the 200,000 social bots that had been identified in this study. The first author was so kind to give us access to this list. And we selected a representative sample, in this case of 121 alleged social bots, and we couldn't find a single social bot. Again, we found many medical experts, scientists, people with impressive professional credentials tweeting under the real name. For example, a very highly decorated scientist from the World Health Organization, a medical student from Rwanda, some researchers from France, from the United States, from Cambodia. All of these people are obviously tweeting about vaccines, mostly because it's part of their area of professional expertise. You can take a look at the complete list. We checked, for example, there's a pastor from Boston. He was also rated a bot, or some tailor is a girl in love with her fiancé. Lots of those people are rated bots, and disinformation researchers pretend those are bots. The two recent studies I wanted to mention where people actually checked the Botometer results. So these people used Botometer to find bots, and they took their time to actually look at the results. It turned out they were all false positives, no real bots. This is another recent paper where a preprint based on Botometer made the headlines. A study from Adelaide, Australia, and they used the Botometer method, and they found out that lots of people supporting Ukraine on Twitter are bots. And of course, the study was picked up by real disinformation outlets such as Russia Today, because they were really happy to read that the support for Ukraine comes from automated bots. So maintaining basic academic standards matters in the real world. So bad disinformation research is fueling actual disinformation. So to conclude, social bot research is fundamentally based on the misclassification of human users as social bots. And we have yet to see a single credible example of a social bot that matches the common definition. And we consider Botometer-based social bot research misleading and toxic, dehumanizes real people, is routinely exploited to discredit undesigned opinions and used for propaganda purposes, and is polluting the way academics study mis- and disinformation. Thank you for your attention. Any questions?